You are 9 years old, and the envelope is heavier than your hand. It is November of 1998, in the kitchen in the small house on Larchman. The third time, she turns half around, and she does not look at you directly. She looks at the envelope, and she says, very gently, the way someone speaks to a small animal they are afraid to scare, "Baby, read it to me. Read it out loud." You do not know yet what this moment is. You do not know that 27 years later, sitting in the office of a therapist named Dr. Linda Vargas in a beige building off Stroop Road, you will be asked to draw a line down the middle of your life and mark the moment that childhood ended. And you will draw that line on a Tuesday evening in November of 1998 in a kitchen on Larchmont Avenue between the cornflakes and the envelope. You do not know it yet, but your hand already knows. Your hand is shaking very slightly as you reach for the envelope, and your fingers are too small to hold it properly, and the paper is the kind of stiff, cheap envelope that the phone company used to use in the late 90s, the kind that always cut the soft skin between your thumb and your finger if you were not careful. You are not careful. You will get a thin paper cut along the side of your thumb that night, and you will not notice it until you go to bed. The amount on the bill is $347.18. You read it out loud, the way she asked you to, and your voice is flat and careful, the voice you use in school when you do not want the teacher to know you are not sure. You read the address. You read the account number. You read the date the payment was due, which was 11 days ago, and then you read the new date, which is in red, and which is 6 days from now, and which is the date after which, according to the small paragraph in the box at the bottom of the page, the line will be disconnected. You read that part too. You read the words service interruption. You read the words subject to reconnection fee. Your mother does not turn around. She is still washing the coffee mug. Her thumb is going around the rim, around and around, and you understand, in the way that small children understand things they are not supposed to understand, that she is not washing the mug anymore. She is just touching something while you read. When you are done, there is a long silence. The refrigerator hums. The wall clock ticks. Somewhere down the street, a car door slams. You do not say anything because you are 9 years old and you do not know what a child is supposed to say at this moment. And finally, your mother turns around all the way and she walks over to you and she puts her hand on the back of your head the way she did when you were small. And she says, "You're my little man. You're my little man, aren't you, baby?" And you nod, because what else does a 9-year-old do? You are not yet aware that you have just been hired. There was no contract, there was no conversation, there was no decision made out loud by anyone to give you a job that 31-year-old adults in this country routinely fail at, and there will not be one. There will simply be, from this moment forward, a quiet redistribution of weight. The envelope, which used to live on the counter behind the bread box where you could not see it, will now live on the kitchen table where you can. The other envelopes that arrive over the next weeks and months will follow it. The phone calls that come in the evening, the ones from the men with patient voices and the women with sharp voices, will be answered first by your mother, who will then, after a few minutes, hold the receiver out to you and mouth the words, "Tell them." And by the time you are 11, the receiver will be handed to you first, and your mother will stand in the doorway, listening, and you will learn, before you have learned long division properly, the specific difference between a creditor who can be put off until the 15th of the month and a creditor who cannot. This is how a child becomes a household CFO. It does not happen with a ceremony. It happens with a kitchen table. My name is Wes Calder. I have spent the better part of 8 months sitting across from a 36-year-old man named Elijah Marks, in coffee shops and in his living room, and once, late at night, in the parking lot of a closed library, listening to him try to explain to me what it was like to be the financial center of a household before he had grown into his own shoe size. I came to this story the way I come to most of them, through a small detail that would not let me go. In Elijah's case, the detail was a brown accordion folder that he kept on the top shelf of his bedroom closet, behind a stack of sweaters he never wore, and that he had kept on the top shelf of every closet he had ever owned since he was 11 years old. The folder contained 26 bills. He could tell you, without opening it, the amount on each one. He could tell you the date each was paid or the date each was not paid. He could tell you which one was for the dentist who agreed to a payment plan and which one was for the dentist who did not. He had carried this folder in some form for 25 years. The first time he showed it to me, he set it down on the table between us very carefully, the way a person sets down something that is heavier than it looks. And he said, quote _5 __. This is an episode about that folder. It is also an episode about a girl named Naomi Reyes, who lived 4 houses down from Elijah on the same Larchmont Avenue, in a house with a chain-link fence and a brown station wagon in the driveway, and whose mother, by every external measure, was in a financial situation just as fragile as Cheryl Marx's. Naomi will come into this story later. I am telling you about her now because the structure of what you are about to hear is 2 paths, not 1. There are 2 children on the same street in the same November with the same kind of envelopes arriving in the same kind of mailboxes. One of them picked up the pen, the other one did not. And the rest of their lives bent very slowly and very quietly around that single difference. I want to be careful here. I am not going to tell you that Naomi made the right choice and Elijah made the wrong one. That is not what this story is. Children do not make choices the way adults make choices. Children respond to the temperature of the room they are standing in. The temperature in Cheryl Marx's kitchen on that November evening was the temperature of a woman who had no one else to ask, and a boy who was already, by nature, the kind of child who watched faces. The temperature in Naomi's kitchen, 4 houses down, was different in ways we will get to. The point is not blame, the point is arithmetic. The point is that what gets handed to a 9-year-old does not stop being heavy when the 9-year-old turns 10. It accumulates. So let me take you back to that table. Let me take you back to the envelope. You are 9. You have read the bill out loud. Your mother has put her hand on the back of your head and called you her little man. And now she has gone into the bedroom to lie down for 45 minutes before her second shift, and you are alone with the bill at the kitchen table. The cornflakes have turned into pale brown pulp at the bottom of the bowl. The wall clock says 7:42. You do not move the bill. You do not put it back in the envelope. You sit with it. You read it again. You read the part about the disconnection one more time, and you do something that no one has asked you to do, but that you will do for the next 9 years without anyone asking you will do for the next 9 years without anyone asking. You take a piece of notebook paper out of your school folder, the kind with the wide blue lines for kids who are still learning to write small, and you take a yellow pencil with the eraser worn down to the metal, and at the top of the page you write, in your careful 4th grade handwriting, the word bills. You underline it twice, and underneath that word, you write the number 347, and beside it, in parentheses, you write the word phone, and beside that, the date 6 days from now. You do not know what you are doing. You only know that your mother does not have a list, and that the envelope on the table will get lost in the pile by the toaster if someone does not write it down somewhere, and that you are the only other person in the house. This is your first ledger. You will keep some version of it for the next 25 years. By the time you are 11, the ledger has moved from notebook paper to a small spiral-bound checkbook register that your mother brought home from the credit union and never used. You write in it with a blue ballpoint pen, in handwriting that has gotten smaller and tighter and more adult-looking than the handwriting of any of your classmates. You have a system. The phone bill is on the 5th of every month. The electric bill is on the 12th. The gas bill is on the 18th, and the gas bill is the one that you have learned can be paid late by up to 9 days without a fee, which means that in the months when there is not enough money, the gas bill is the one that gets pushed. You know this because you have called the gas company. You have called the gas company a number of times. The first time you called, you were 10. You stood on a kitchen chair to reach the cordless phone on top of the refrigerator, because that was where your mother kept it so that the calls could not be made without her knowing. and you dialed the number from the back of the bill, and you waded through the menu, and when a woman with a flat Midwestern voice said, "Account holder, please," you said, in the smallest voice you could find, "My mom needs to talk to you about the bill, but she's at work. Can I take the message?" And the woman, who must have heard something in your voice, paused for a long second and then said, very kindly, "Honey, let me see what I can do." That woman's name was Linda. You will never know her last name. She worked at the Vectron Customer Service Center in Evansville, Indiana, which you also do not know at the time. What you do know is that Linda is the first adult outside your house who treats you like a person who has a problem instead of like a child who is interrupting. Linda explains to you, slowly, what a payment extension is. Linda explains to you what a hardship form is. Linda explains to you that if your mother calls back between 2 and 4 in the afternoon and asks for the supervisor on duty, there is a higher chance the late fee will be waived. You write all of this down in the back of the checkbook register in careful blue ink. You write Linda's name. You write the words payment extension, and you draw a small star next to it. When you hang up the phone, your hands are shaking, but you also feel something else, something that you do not have a word for yet, but that you will spend 20 years trying to unlearn. You feel useful. You feel like you have done something that mattered. You feel, for the first time in your life, like a person with a job. This is the part of the story that the adults around you, when you tell them later, will say is sweet. They will use the word responsible. They will use the word mature for his age. Your 5th grade teacher, Mrs. Patterson, will write on a parent-teacher conference form that Elijah is an unusually capable young man with a strong work ethic. And your mother will fold that form in half and put it on the refrigerator under a magnet shaped like a strawberry. And the form will stay there for 2.5 years until the magnet finally loses its grip and the form falls behind the refrigerator and is forgotten. Nobody who reads that form, including the teacher who wrote it, including the mother who hung it up, including the boy who beamed at it for a week, understands what is actually happening. What is actually happening is that a child is being praised for the symptoms of a problem. The capability is real, the work ethic is real, the maturity is real, but it is not the maturity of a child who has grown up well. It is the maturity of a child who has grown up early, and there is a difference, and the difference will cost him a lifetime. Your mother gives you a nickname during this period. She calls you my little man. She says it when she hands you the phone. She says it when you bring her the ledger to look over. She says it when you stay up past your bedtime to wait for her to come home from the second shift, sitting at the kitchen table with the bills in front of you, falling asleep with your head on the placemat. My little man. She means it as love. She does mean it as love. I want to be very clear about that because Cheryl Marks is not a villain in this story, and Elijah will tell you every time that she did the best she could with what she had. But there is a thing that happens to a word when you hear it for the first time at 9, and you keep hearing it until you are 17. And the thing that happens is that the word becomes the shape of you. By the time Elijah was a sophomore in high school, he could not, when asked who he was, separate the answer from the words, the man of the house. He had been the man of the house since 4th grade. He had been a man in his own mind since the day the envelope was heavier than his hand. This is what parentification looks like from the inside. It does not look like abuse. It looks like a child being needed. And the trap of being needed when you are 9 is that there is no part of your nervous system that is capable of saying no to it. So the years stack up. You are 12. You are 13. You are 14. The ledger has gotten thicker. There is now a second ledger for the medical bills because your mother had her gallbladder out the spring you were 13, and the hospital is sending letters that come in heavier envelopes with cellophane windows that are slightly differently shaped than the phone company envelopes, and you have learned to recognize the difference at a distance. You can identify a creditor letter from across the room. You can tell the difference between a first notice and a final notice by the weight of the envelope, because the final notices are printed on heavier paper to imply seriousness. And you noticed this when you were 11, and you have never unnoticed it since. You can name the 4 major collection agencies that work the Dayton area by the way their hold music sounds. You know that the agency that uses the smooth jazz version of What a Wonderful World is more likely to settle for 60% than the agency that uses the orchestral hold loop. And you know this not because anyone taught you, but because you sat through enough hold music to learn it the way a child learns the theme songs of cartoons. And here is where the first crack appears. You are 13. It is May. Your 7th grade class is going on a field trip to the Cincinnati Zoo, and the cost is $40, which includes the bus and the lunch and the entry ticket. The permission slip has been in your backpack for 2 weeks. You have not given it to your mother. You know, in the way you know everything in this house, that there is not $40 for the field trip this month, because the gas bill was already pushed and the car insurance is due on the 23rd. And you have run the math in the back of the checkbook register, and $40 is not a number that exists. So on the morning of the field trip, you tell your mother that you do not feel well. You stay home. She does not question it. She does not have time to question it. She kisses the top of your head and goes to work. And you spend the day on the couch watching daytime television and pretending to be sick. And somewhere around 11:30 in the morning, you realize that you are crying, and that you have been crying for some time, and that you do not know why. You tell yourself that you did not want to go anyway. You tell yourself that the zoo is for little kids. You tell yourself that you are tired and that staying home is better. You will tell yourself these things so many times over the next 15 years that by the time you are 28 and sitting in Dr. Vargas's office, you will not be able to remember whether you ever actually wanted to see the giraffes, and you will start to cry again, in the same way, for the same reason, and you will still not have a word for it. You are 15. Your friend Marcus, who lives 2 streets over, is talking about a movie that came out last weekend. He is quoting lines from it. He is laughing about a scene at the end. You stand there and you nod, and you laugh in the right places, and you do not tell him that you have not seen the movie, because you have not seen any movie in the theater for almost 3 years, because movie tickets are $9 and concessions are $12, and $21 is the difference between paying the water bill on the 15th and paying it on the 22nd. And you know that you know this. And you know that 15-year-olds are not supposed to know this. You laugh with Marcus. You go home. You sit down at the kitchen table. You open the ledger. You move on. You do not notice, because nobody who is in it ever notices, that you have stopped having a self that exists outside the ledger. You have preferences in the ledger. You have feelings in the ledger. You have a future in the ledger. Outside of it, there is nothing that has been allowed to grow. 4 houses down the street, a girl named Naomi Reyes is sitting in her own kitchen, and her mother is also opening an envelope. And the envelope also says, "Final Notice," in the same red letters. And the amount inside is also somewhere around $300. And Naomi is 9 years old, the same age as Elijah, and the date is also November of 1998. I want you to hold the 2 kitchens in your mind at the same time. They are the same kitchen. Almost. The wallpaper is different. The mother is different. The light is different. But the envelope is the same envelope. Naomi's mother is named Yolanda Reyes. She is 28 years old. She works the front desk at a dental office on Far Hills Avenue. And when she opens the envelope, she does something that Cheryl Marks does not do. And the difference between what these 2 women do on these 2 evenings, 4 houses apart, is the difference between 2 human lives. Yolanda reads the bill. She puts it down on the counter. She walks into the living room where Naomi is doing her homework on the carpet, and she crouches down so that she is at Naomi's level. And she says, quote, and Naomi, who is 9, nods, and Yolanda kisses her on the forehead and stands back up and walks back into the kitchen, and the conversation is over. I want to be careful here, because I do not want to make Yolanda Reyes into a saint. She made plenty of mistakes as a parent, Naomi will tell you about them. But on this particular evening, in this particular kitchen, Yolanda did the one thing that almost no parent in financial crisis manages to do, which is to draw a line around her child and say, with her actual mouth, the words underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, underscore, underscore. There was no ledger handed to Naomi. There was no phone receiver. There was no nickname. There was no praise for being responsible. There was, instead, a 9-year-old who spent that evening doing her math homework on the carpet and who did not know until she was 26 and sitting in her own therapist's office that the way her mother handled that envelope was the most important thing her mother had ever done for her. 27 years later, when I sat across from Naomi Reyes in a coffee shop on Wayne Avenue, and I asked her what she remembered about the bills, she looked at me for a long moment, and she said, "I remember that there were bills. I remember the envelopes on the counter. I remember my mom on the phone sometimes, sounding stressed. But I never read one. I never opened one. I never knew the amounts. They were not my business. They were never my business." And then she said, in the same voice, "I think I owe my whole adult life to that." Now let me show you the math. Elijah Marks, between the ages of 9 and 18, made or received an estimated 6,847 phone calls related to household debt. We arrived at this number together, sitting at his kitchen table with a yellow legal pad, working backwards from his mother's old phone records and his own memory. Some of the number is a guess. Most of it is not. 6,847 phone calls. If you assume an average of 4 minutes per call, which is conservative, that is 27,388 minutes of his childhood spent on the phone with adults whose job was to extract money from his family. That is 456 hours. That is 19 full 24-hour days. 19 days of a child's life spent on hold, spent negotiating, spent saying, "Yes, ma'am," and "I understand," and "Is there any way we could?" If you laid those 19 days end to end, they would cover almost the entire month of June. Naomi Reyes, between the ages of 9 and 18, made 0 such phone calls. Not one. That is the math. This is the moment Elijah described to me, and I am going to tell you about it now because it is the moment everything in his interior life turned over, the way a stone turns over in a river. He was 26 years old. He was sitting in Dr. Vargas's office for the 4th time. Dr. Vargas had asked him, at the previous session, to bring in any object from his childhood that felt important. He had brought the brown accordion folder. He had set it on the small table between them, and Dr. Vargas, who is a soft-spoken woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a beaded chain, had picked up the folder, and she had opened it, and she had looked at the bills inside, and she had looked back up at Elijah, and she had said, very gently, quote, 26. He told me that for almost a full minute he could not breathe. He told me that the room got very small. He told me that he had spent his entire adult life believing that what he had done as a child was a kind of love, a kind of contribution, a kind of saving of the family that would have otherwise drowned. And in one sentence, this woman with the beaded glasses chain had reframed all of it. And what was on the other side of the reframe was a thing he had never been allowed to see, which was that there had been a child in that kitchen, and the child had needed someone to protect him, and no one had, and the bills had been paid in his childhood, and you do not get childhoods back. I did not help my family. I paid for them. With my childhood. That is the sentence he wrote, in blue ballpoint, on the back of one of the bills in the brown folder, the night after that session. It is still there. He showed it to me. The handwriting is small and tight and adult. You sit in your car. It is March of 2017. It is 7:48 in the evening. You have just left Dr. Vargas's office, and you are in the parking lot, and you have not started the engine, and you are not going to start the engine for almost 26 minutes. Because there is something you have to admit to yourself first, and you have to admit it before you go home. Because if you go home before you admit it, the kitchen of your apartment will swallow it, the way the kitchen on Larchmont swallowed everything else. So you sit. The dashboard is dark. The lot is half empty. There is a single security light buzzing over a dumpster at the far end, and you say it out loud, in the empty car, in a voice you do not recognize as your own. I do not know what I like. You say it again. I do not know what I like. I only know what things cost. You realize, sitting there, that you cannot name a favorite movie. You cannot name a favorite song that is not a song your mother liked. You cannot name a food you would order if money were not a consideration, because money has been a consideration in every meal you have eaten since you were 9, and the consideration has become the meal. You cannot name what you wanted to be when you grew up, because you were already grown up, and the question never had room to land. You realize, sitting in that car, that you are 26 years old and you have been a 40-year-old man for 17 years, and that somewhere underneath the 40-year-old, there is a 9-year-old who never finished being 9, and that the 9-year-old has been sitting in the dark of you at a kitchen table with an envelope for 17 years, waiting for someone to come and get him. And you understand, sitting in that car, that no one is coming. That the only person in the world who can go back into that kitchen and get that boy is you, and that you cannot bring him forward into your life by continuing to be useful to your mother, because the kitchen will simply absorb him again. You have to do something else. You have to do the thing that the 9-year-old could not do, because 9-year-olds cannot do it, and that is why it had to wait until now. You have to give the folder back. It takes you 9 more months to do it. That is also part of the story. There is no version of this where the action happens cleanly, the next morning, in a beam of light. The action happens slowly, the way real action happens, in fits and starts, in 2 steps forward and 1 step back, in conversations rehearsed in the shower and abandoned at the doorway. But on a Saturday in December of 2017, you drive to your mother's house on Larchmont Avenue, and you bring the brown accordion folder with you. And you sit down at the same kitchen table where you read the first bill out loud at 9 years old. And the wallpaper is different now, and the wall clock is different now, and your mother is 50 years old, and her hair is mostly gray. And you put the folder on the table between you, and you say, in a voice that is steadier than you expected it to be, quote, 29. She cries. You cry. It is not a clean conversation. She tells you that she never meant to make you carry it, and you tell her that you know, and you both mean what you say, and neither of you is wrong. And then you do something that surprises you both, which is that you ask her, very quietly, if she will tell you a story about herself from before you were born. Any story, just one, because you realize, sitting at that table, that you have spent your whole life knowing what your mother owed, and not knowing who your mother was. And she thinks for a long moment, and then she tells you about a boy she dated in 10th grade who took her to see a movie at the Lowe's downtown, and how she had a green dress that her own mother had made, and how she remembers the green dress more than she remembers the boy. And you listen. You do not write anything down. There is no ledger for this. You drive home that night without the folder. You leave it on her kitchen table. You will not see it again. She will throw most of it away within the year, and the rest will get lost in a move, and the brown accordion folder that you carried with you for 25 years will simply cease to be in your possession, and the world will not end, and the phone will not get cut off, and your mother will pay her own bills, slowly and imperfectly, and with the kind of late fees that adults pay when they are managing their own lives, and you will, for the first time in your conscious memory, not know exactly how much money is in your mother's checking account, and the not knowing will feel, for about 3 weeks, like falling. And then, very gradually, like air. You grieve. You did not expect this part. You grieve a child who is not dead because he was never quite alive, because there was never quite room for him to be. You grieve the boy who did not go to the zoo. You grieve the 15-year-old who laughed at the movie he had not seen. You grieve the 11-year-old who stood on a chair to reach the phone. You grieve every version of you that did not get to be small. And you do this on a couch in your own apartment with no folder in the closet, and you cry the way you did not cry on the field trip day in May of 1995, and the crying is 22 years late, and it still counts. Here is what I did not know then. I did not know, when I was 9, that what was being asked of me was not love. I did not know that a child who is needed by a parent is being given something the child cannot refuse, and that the inability to refuse is not the same as a yes. I did not know that the words, "my little man," were a sentence I was being given, and that I would serve that sentence for 17 years before I knew it was one. I did not know that maturity in a child is almost always a wound that has learned to walk upright. I did not know that there is a difference between contributing to a household and carrying a household, and that when a child carries a household, the household does not get lighter. The child gets compressed. I did not know that I had a right to not know what the gas bill was. I did not know that there was a version of 9 years old in which a child opens an envelope, hands it to an adult, and walks away to do their math homework on the carpet. I did not know until I sat across from Naomi Reyes in a coffee shop on Wayne Avenue that the version existed at all. I had thought my whole life that what happened in my kitchen was simply what happened in kitchens. It was not. It was a specific thing with a specific name that has been studied and documented and given a clinical term, instrumental parentification. And the existence of the term is itself a small mercy, because a thing with a name can be set down. A thing without a name has to be carried forever. If you were that child, and I think some of you watching this were that child because the algorithm did not bring you here by accident, I want to say something to you directly. You do not owe them the rest of your life. You did not sign anything. There was no contract. The job you were given was a job you could not refuse, and the work you did was real, and the work mattered. And also, it was not your work. It was never your work. The pen was too big for your hand, and someone should have taken it from you, and no one did. And the failure was not yours. You can put the pen down now. You are allowed. The child who held it is allowed to leave the table. A child should not be the one holding the pen. A child should not be the one holding the pen. In the next episode, we are going to talk about what happens after the folder gets returned, because giving it back is only the first move. There is a longer arc, and it has to do with the chains of family loyalty. The invisible threads that bind an adult child to the role they were assigned at 9, and what it actually takes, in real time, in real conversations, to break those threads without breaking the family. We are going to follow Elijah for another year. We are going to meet his sister, who carried a different version of the same weight. We are going to find out what it costs, and what it gives back, when an adult finally stops being the child who saved everyone. But for tonight, I want to leave you here, at the kitchen table, with the envelope. Put down the pen. The child is allowed to leave the table.